Hi, I'm Nora Muchanic, and welcome to Perspective, New Jersey. My guest today has been from hell and back, suffering from mental illness over the last few years. Gripped by a debilitating depression, she lost interest in everything to the point where she wanted to take her own life. But Carol Kivler of Lawrenceville fought back and now makes it her mission to talk openly about her struggles with depression and the electroshock therapy that helped bring her out of it. She's written 3 books on the issue and speaks openly about it all over the country, and is here today to share her story, hoping to help others who struggle with mental illness. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. And I read your book, and I have to say that the thing that struck me about it was that it's so frank, it's so honest, and it's really at a level where everyone can understand it. Intentional, I'm sure.
Absolutely. I wanted it to help as many people as it could, so I wrote it in a very conversational style.
Now, was it, I guess we should go through your journey first. That's probably the best thing to do. You're 40 years old, your life is great, you're married, you have kids, and talk about what happened.
Yeah, life, children, money in the bank, a great job, a loving husband, and I started having symptoms that were very unlike anything I'd ever had. A lot of physical symptoms, as well as things like sleep disruption, racing thoughts. I was having a lack of concentration, but I had things like I felt like I had a helmet on at all time. I had joint aches. So we went to the doctors and he said, let's test you for lupus and multiple sclerosis. And those tests came back negative. And then he said, I think you need to see a psychiatrist because I think you're depressed. And my first response was, what do I have to be depressed about? And he said, well, there's something called major depressive disorder. You don't really have to have something to be depressed. It's a chemical imbalance in your brain.
Now, it sounds like you, and like many people would, you can't accept this kind of a diagnosis, right? It's really difficult to process that. Tell me about that.
Sure. Well, first of all, no one in my family had ever been depressed. We didn't even really know what depression was all about. And so to hear that, and to hear that we can help you, but there's good news and bad news. We know what this is. That's the good news. The bad news is it takes about 6 weeks for the medications to really start to take hold.
Now, and we'll talk more about that later, and them not taking hold, but you described this as acute depression. It came on suddenly. Like, how suddenly?
Well, it came on suddenly in that it started, and it took me about 6 to 8 weeks before I really it started to impair my ability to work, to take care of my children, and to just want to live.
And is there a way to describe what that feels like, what's going on inside of your body or your head?
You start looking at yourself and asking yourself, will I ever be the same again? I don't feel like Carol Kivler. Where did she go? Where is she? That was the first feeling. The second feeling was really, am I losing my mind? Am I going someplace and I'll never come back?
Scary.
It was so scary.
And are other people noticing the difference in you at the same time?
Absolutely.
Tell
my
me.
parents were asking me, what's wrong with you? What did we do to her in her childhood that could have done this? My sisters were asking, did I commit a criminal act? Did I do something that it was such a secret that I wasn't telling anybody? Was I molested as a child? Everyone wanted a reason of why all of a sudden this came on like a bulldozer.
And you don't have a reason.
I have no reason.
And you call it the beast.
I do.
Tell me about that.
Well, I call it the beast because it robs my ability to live life. It grabs me by the neck, and it isolates me. It makes me hopeless, and it takes away my desire to eat. It takes away my desire to sleep. It takes every part of me away.
And you were hospitalized over the years, I guess 4 times over a 10-year period. Correct. Because of this. Did you understand what was happening?
Not really. In the second, third, and fourth, yes, I knew what was happening. But the first one, I have to tell you, Nora, it was so scary. I had no idea what was happening because I wasn't getting better in the hospital. I was still in a lockdown ward, and they were dousing me with all kinds of medications, and nobody had an answer.
Which is the scariest of all, I bet, right?
You bet.
So let's backtrack a little bit. You do finally go to the doctors because your husband says we've got to do this. So you go to the doctors and he puts you on medication, but for many medications, it takes time for them to kick in.
Right.
So they tell you, wait 5 or 6 weeks.
5 or 6 weeks. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm going to feel like this for 5 or 6 more weeks. But instead of getting better, I became worse.
And that is because
I have medication-resistant depression.
I didn't know that existed.
It exists. The medication does nothing for me. It doesn't jumpstart. It doesn't slay the beast.
And is that common?
It's more common than you would believe. More common. I don't know the stats behind that, but it is more common. And there were other people within the hospital with me with medication-resistant depression.
So you get to the point, you're in the hospital, and or you're taking these medications, and you think, I'm going to get better, I'm waiting to get better, and it's not happening. You become suicidal.
I do. I became suicidal, and that was the day before I got into the hospital, and I was hospitalized for 38 days in that hospitalization.
And when you're there, do you realize when you're hospitalized, just you're drowning, right?
Well, I was drowning, I was isolated, I was consumed with anxiety because I also have general anxiety disorder. So I was consumed with anxiety, I wanted to jump out of my skin. I wasn't feeling any better, I wasn't eating, I was losing weight at an alarming rate, I still wasn't sleeping, and I wasn't safe in my own house.
And so where are your kids at this point, and what's happening with your family while here?
Well, I'm very fortunate because my mother and father moved into my home to take care of my children and their schedules. And I was in the hospital, and people would say, get better for your kids. I couldn't even get better for myself, let alone my children.
And we have to take a break in a second, but when people say that to you, get better for your kids and snap out of it, what's your reaction to that?
I wish I could, and I wish it was that easy, but it's not.
It's not. Then talk about what you think motivates people to say things like that, or do they realize that they're damaging or they're not helpful at all?
I don't think they know what to say. It's not like a physical illness when you have cancer and people bring brownies and casseroles. When you have a mental health disorder, people don't know what to say or do.
So what would you have them say?
I would have them say, you're not alone, we'll get through this, and I'm here to support you.
All right, we need to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to find out exactly how Carol Kivler helped herself and turned things around. Please stay with us. Hi, we're back, and we're talking with Carol Kivler of Lawrenceville, New Jersey, who has written 3 books and talks openly about her struggles with mental illness. And when we left off, we were talking about you'd been hospitalized, and you're medication resistant. So any kind of medication they would give you to try to help you wasn't working. So they suggest to you ECT. Tell us what this is and your reaction.
Okay. Well, ECT, people think of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and that's the image that I got in my head.
It's electroconvulsive therapy.
Correct.
And it's basically shock treatments. That's how most people know it.
It is shock treatment. And I like to call it the defibrillator of the brain, because when our heart stops, they give us CPR and they jolt us with electricity. Well, when the neurons in our brain either misfire like this or they stop firing completely, they shock it and wakes them up, and they start to connect again, and you lift out of that depth of depression.
But they suggest this to you, the doctor, you want to hear nothing about it, and you really resist it. Talk about that resistance and why.
The resistance was more not because of the therapy itself. The resistance came from what would people think. Would the neighbors let my children play in their house because their mother had shock therapy? Would the dean at Mercer County Community College ask me to come back because he knew I had shock therapy? So I was more concerned about the stigma around the treatment than I was of the treatment itself.
And if there are people who aren't familiar with the reference, there was a movie years ago called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and there was a very violent depiction of electroshock therapy in there, and that's what a generation has in their minds about it, and I imagine you as well.
I did. And they showed me a film. It's very different. Like most medical treatments, it has progressed over the years, and it's very humane. You have anesthesia, you're put to sleep, you have a muscle relaxant, and to be quite frank, I said, when is the treatment going to be taken? And she said, you're done.
Wow. But it took a while to get you to that point. Everybody's after you. Do it, do it. Tell me about that.
Do it. Well, my parents wanted it done. My husband wanted it done. And I held out. And to the point where I signed the papers and then reneged the papers. Until one very empathetic nurse convinced me to give it a try.
What did she say to you?
She said, you know what, Carol? Your mother wants her daughter back, your husband wants his wife back, and your children want their mother back.
And when you sort of described it, so you wake up from it and you don't feel anything, or there's side effects?
Well, no, I had a bit of a headache for the first couple of treatments, and by the third treatment, when my husband walked in the room, he had tears coming down his eyes, and I thought, what's going on? And he said, you have an affect. It's the first time I can see a twinkle in your eye and a little life in your face.
Because you've been so flat for so long?
Flat for a long time.
So how often do you have to get these, or talk about the recovery? You get the electroshock, it shifts things for you, and then what's the comeback like?
The comeback takes about 3 months for me after I had it. Your treatment is given Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I had 12 the first series. And it takes about 3 months for me really to get my sea legs again, to the point where I can go back to work. I start taking care of my children by myself, going to the grocery store, making dinner and things of that such. But it's a process. You don't just wake up one day and feel happy again. I recall vividly thinking one day, wow, colors look brighter.
Really?
I must be getting better. Yeah.
And then are you also doing therapy at the same time?
Yes.
Are you trying medications after the ECT? What
Yes.
happens? Talk about that process.
Sure. After the ECT was done, then they put me on a schedule of medications, a variety of medications. I call it my medication cocktail. There's so many medications.
And why did it work then and not before the shock therapy?
Because they were able to jumpstart those neurons. The medication couldn't jumpstart them.
Okay.
But it could sustain the jumpstart. And so I went on medication. I was on talk therapy. I was in an outpatient program, a day program. And little by little, I got back to my life.
And you call this in one of your books the silver bullet. Do you feel like it saved your life?
It saved my life 4 times, Nora. 4 times.
All right, so talk about that, because what happens? There's a relapse, or...
Yeah, it seemed like I had a relapse every 4 years. So I would be good for 4 years, and then the beast would show up again in May. Only in May the beast shows up for me.
Is there any reason for that, or have they been able to figure that out?
They haven't been able to figure that out. No. It just seems to be the cycle that I'm on. And so I'd be good for 4 years. I'd go back into the hospital, have more shock treatment, good for 4 years, back in the hospital. I had 2 breaks in 1 year because in the third series, they gave me too much.
Oh, really?
And, yeah. And so it sent me into a different kind of a spin, and that was mania. And I had never had mania before, so everybody thought she's happy.
She's just too happy.
She's just too happy. Right.
And there's an 80% success rate, I guess, with this. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, efficacy is 80 to 85% with ECT and only 40 to 45% with medication and talk therapy.
But then again, there's that stigma.
Correct.
And it goes on, because you mentioned in the book a mentor who... Tell the story about what the mentor said to you.
The mentor said to me, you don't have mental illness. You don't need those medications. I don't know why you just don't stop them.
And so talk about what that's like as a consumer, as they call it in the business,
Yeah.
and somebody who's suffering, to have people say that to you.
It's devastating. It's devastating because you start to second guess yourself and you say to yourself, well, maybe I don't really need that medication. Maybe I am okay. And so you really start to question, is the doctor right? Is your mentor right? Someone who you trust and respect? And so you really start to question what people are telling you.
And there was another doctor who did the same thing, which is a little scary, but tell that story.
Well, I went in on the 3rd time and immediately said the only thing that works for me is ECT. And he said, well, we're not having ECT right away. We're going to wait and try some meds. And I literally went up to the nurse's station and said, you know what? I need a different doctor because that doctor's not listening to me. And the only thing that works for me is ECT.
And you talked about the stigma and you being worried about doing the electroshock therapy because you were afraid what people would say or if they would let your kids hang out with your kids. What was the reaction after? Because people, I'm sure, found out. So do you know what it was like, or were people different to you?
I was treated like a fragile china doll for a very long time. And I would say to them, I'm still Carol, and you can treat me the way you treated me before. But everyone was very cautious around me. There was not a lot of noise behind my back. Well, I'm sure there was noise behind my back. I just didn't know that it was happening.
Right.
But it was a learning experience for everyone, because I would start to explain what that was and what it was like and how it helped me. And the more that I talk about it, the more people understand.
And it's really making a difference. So we need to take another break. We'll be back right after this, but we're talking with Carol Kivler and her journey through mental illness and back. Please stay with us. Hi, we're back, and we're talking with Carol Kivler, who's written and lectures extensively about mental illness and her journey through it and back. Carol, we were talking about you received electroshock therapy on 4 different occasions, and when you're beginning to recover, you decided that you needed to also have non-medical treatments that will help you move forward. Talk about the ideas that you developed and that you talk about in your book.
Yeah. Well, I knew the medication and the talk therapy wasn't holding me very long. So I started to explore some other kinds of things, such as journaling. Get it out of your head and onto paper.
Does that help?
It helps tremendously.
How so?
Because it seems when my anxiety is at the worst, if I sit down with pen to paper and I start writing, it comes right out of me on what's really bothering me. So I'm able to see it and deal with it. I started a lot of exercise. I actually started without even recognizing it. I walked a marathon. And because I trained so much for that marathon, I was feeling better and better. So exercise is a very big part of my wellness strategies.
Scheduling activities?
You bet. Always have something to look forward to, whether it's a play that you're going to see, dinner with a friend, or a movie.
You said, or you write that you recognize how to be instead of do. What does that mean?
Well, I'm an A+ personality, and I like to say I'm a recovering A+ personality, I was always doing. I had to learn that I'm a human being, not a human doing.
And following up that, sleep is critical.
That's the number one trigger for me. If I have disruptions in my sleep for more than 3 consecutive days, my neurons, something is going down.
You can tell.
I can tell, absolutely.
You can feel it.
I can feel it.
In one of the books that you've written, you list the strategies. It's kind of like in a handy little pocket-sized book, and you go through the alphabet and do things. And I just want to go through a couple of the letters that you use. A is for accept your illness.
Wow. Took me 10 years to accept, Nora. 10 years, because I didn't want to believe I had an illness that I'd have for the rest of my life.
And not everyone makes that jump, I imagine, right? Or comes to acceptance.
Some people never make it.
Another thing is ignore. The I is for ignore thought patterns. What happens?
Well, the thought patterns are things that's like usually suicidal ideation, which is saying to you, I'm hopeless. I don't want to live anymore. And if you recognize that is part of the illness, it's not who you are, it's the illness talking. It's a lot easier to deal with.
Letter O is overcome the stigma of mental illness. And I read a stat in your book that I guess there are 15 million people diagnosed in the country, and only half of them ever make it to get help?
To get treatment, right. Because 2/3 of the people never get treatment because the stigma is still worse than the illness. Do you remember when we couldn't talk about AIDS or cancer? Well, we can talk openly about those. We can't talk openly about mental health disorders.
That must be so disturbing to you.
Well, it's disturbing because a mental illness is no different than a physical illness. It's just illness of your brain.
You wouldn't tell someone with diabetes to snap out of it, or someone with a heart issue.
No. But yet we do that with a mental health disorder.
And, of course, that's what you're fighting against. You travel all over. Tell me about what you do.
Yes, I speak in medical schools, nursing schools, hospitals, treatment centers, association meetings, and I put the face of hope on mental health.
And we touched on this briefly, but it's easy to discount depression. You know, so what's it like when these people are hearing from you and seeing someone who's lived through it and can articulately express exactly what's going on in the head of someone who's suffering?
The first thing they say is that you give me hope, that maybe you came back, you've been on the other side, and you got better. Because you did it, maybe I can do it.
You were, tell me while we were in the break, tell me the story about the girl you were just speaking recently at college.
I was just at William Patterson University speaking to nursing students in their psych rotation. And one young woman was crying in the audience, and I knew that I had hit a chord with her. So I said to her, she came up to me afterwards to hug me, and I said, what's happening? And she said, I need to apologize to my mother. And I said, what do you mean? She said, my mother struggles with depression and anxiety, and I thought she was a drama queen. But you described certain things the exact way she described them. I need to apologize.
So that's got to feel pretty good for you.
Well, I'm living my purpose.
Simple as that,
As
right?
simple as that.
You know, one thing I wanted to ask you about is that a lot of people think that depression is the same thing as sadness, and that's not true.
It's not.
Can you explain it for us?
Well, grief is a very deep sadness because you've lost something, whether it be a job, your financial stability, or a relationship. But depression takes over your life. It steals your ability to work, to eat, to sleep, to live.
And a lot of people don't get that, do they?
No, they don't get it. They think, oh, you're blue. It'll be a sunny day tomorrow.
That's not going to cut it.
It doesn't cut it.
It doesn't cut it at all.
No.
And there's also a difference between situational, well, you're just talking about it now, situational and, what's the word I want? Clinical depression.
Clinical, major depression. It's called major depressive disorder. Absolutely. There's a big difference. And it's because major depression goes on. It lasts a long time, and it impacts your ability to eat, sleep, work, live.
So what advice would you give to families who are dealing with someone who they may say, oh, is just blue or needs to snap out of it? What do they need to know? What should they look for?
Okay, first of all, they need to know that there's hope. That a big portion of the people that get treatment do recover. They also need to look at what's happening to the person. It's usually polar opposites. You're either sleeping too much or not sleeping. You're either eating too much or not eating. You're either up all night or down all night. So they need to look at polar opposites, and they need to they need to normalize that, you know what, this can be treated. We need to get you to a physician. We need to see what we can do to make you feel better.
And that doesn't happen so often.
It doesn't, because many times the people that really are in depression, they don't even know they're in depression. They just know they don't feel right, but they know, and they're hopeless. And unfortunately, depression can be deadly.
Literally. Well, Carol, I want to thank you so much for sharing your story. It's really, it's wonderful to hear it out of the mouth of someone who has lived through it and written about it, and you're out on the other side. So thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, well, that's it for this edition of Perspective New Jersey. Her name is Carol Kivler, and she's got 3 books out if you're interested. I'm Nora Muchanic. We'll join you again next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.